"A girl!" Tocho cried, horror seizing him as her bloodied hand sank beneath the shattered ice. Her torn clothes clung to her frostbitten, battered body, swallowed by the dark, freezing river. But a reclusive Navajo warrior fearlessly plunged in, pulling her from the icy abyss. What he didn't expect. She was no ordinary girl. She was the Ashcroft heiress, the town's richest woman. Those chasing her wanted her dead, and saving her meant defying their guns. This rescue would change their fates forever. Tocho, a 22-year-old Navajo man, lives alone in a remote forest near Silvervale, where harsh winters blanket the land in snow. Tall, with tied-back black hair and deep eyes, he exudes quiet strength. Once a scout for the U.S. Army, he abandoned the role after witnessing atrocities against his people, carrying guilt and disillusionment. Unmarried and solitary, Tocho resides in a self-built cabin, befriending only the woods and wolves. He hunts, chops wood, and hones survival skills to bury his past, yet secretly yearns for purpose. His life shifts when he rescues Gertrudis Ashcroft, a young woman on the run, drawing him into a perilous journey that sparks love and a new sense of meaning. This girl is Gertrudis Ashcroft. She stumbled through the snow-laden forest, her boots sinking with each desperate step as shouts echoed behind her. 2 bounty hunters, hired by her Uncle Henry for a $5,000 reward, pursued her with rifles ready, their lanterns glinting like wolves' eyes. Her heart thundered as she spotted one raising his gun, and she bolted toward the frozen river. Her foot caught on slick ice, and with a sharp crack, the surface shattered, plunging her into icy water. The current dragged her under, her lungs burning as she clawed at the ice, unable to scream. Tocho, splitting wood near his cabin, froze at the sound of breaking ice. He dropped his axe and sprinted to the river, spotting her shadow thrashing below. Diving into the freezing depths, he grabbed her coat and hauled her through the broken ice, collapsing on the bank. Her face was pale, lips blue. He carried her to his cabin, laying her by the fire and wrapping her in blankets. Gertrudis's eyes flickered open, meeting Tocho's calm stare, but fear gripped her. Was he friend or foe? Her fingers clutched her locket, voice trembling. "Who are you?" Tocho stoked the fire, his voice steady. "Someone who couldn't walk away." She shivered, Hunter's shout still ringing in her mind. Trusting him was a gamble, but she had no choice. She nodded weakly, whispering, "Keep me hidden." Tocho grabbed his rifle, eyes scanning the door as danger loomed outside. Tocho dragged Gertrudis from the riverbank, her body limp and cold, her chest still. His boots crunched through snow as he carried her to his cabin, kicking the door open and laying her near the hearth. He piled logs into the fire, the flames roaring to life, and worked quickly, peeling off her soaked coat and wrapping her in thick blankets. Her face was ghostly pale, lips tinged blue. He rubbed her hands, willing warmth back into her. Gertrudis stirred, eyes snapping open, and scrambled back against the wall, her breath ragged. "Where am I?" she gasped, staring at Tocho with wide, distrustful eyes. He knelt, offering a tin cup of warm water and a piece of bread, his voice low and steady. "You're safe. Drink." She hesitated, fingers trembling as she took the cup, her gaze darting to the door. "Who are you?" she whispered, voice hoarse. Tocho met her eyes, unflinching. "You're alive. That's enough for now." Her hand brushed the silver locket at her neck, its presence a small anchor amidst her fear. The fire's warmth seeped into her, but her heart raced. Could she trust this stranger? The memory of the hunter's shouts pressed against her mind, urging her to flee, yet her body was too weak. She sipped the water, eyes locked on Tocho, searching for deceit but finding only quiet resolve. Swallowing hard, she nodded, choosing to stay, though her hand stayed near the locket, ready to bolt. Tocho stood, checking the door, rifle in hand as the threat outside lingered. Morning light crept through the cabin's window as Gertrudis sat on a buffalo hide, her body aching but warmed by blankets. Outside, Tocho swung his axe, splitting logs with rhythmic precision, each strike echoing his solitary existence. She watched him, her fingers tracing the silver locket, its weight a reminder of her father's legacy. She needed to know if this man would protect her or sell her out. Stepping to the doorway, she leaned against the frame, voice trembling. "Why live out here alone?" Tocho paused, axe in hand, and glanced at her. "It's safer," he resumed chopping, but she pressed on, heart pounding. "My uncle, Henry Ashcroft, wants me dead. He says I stole from our family to take my inheritance." Tocho's grip tightened on the axe, his eyes darkening at Ashcroft, a name tied to Navajo pain. She opened her locket, revealing her father's photo and the inscription, "To Gertrudis, the heir. This proves I'm the true Ashcroft. But there's a $5,000 bounty on me." Her voice cracked, fear spilling out. "You could turn me in, get rich." Tocho set the axe down and walked toward her, boots crunching in the snow. He stopped close, his gaze steady. "I don't want money from men like Henry." His words were firm, a quiet vow. Gertrudis's shoulders relaxed, a knot in her chest loosening. She saw no greed in his eyes, only a guarded pain. Nodding, she stepped back inside, her trust fragile but growing. Tocho returned to his work, but his glance lingered, a bond forming amidst the looming danger. Tocho crouched near the cabin, his breath visible in the cold air as he scanned the horizon. A thin trail of smoke curled above distant trees, too controlled to be natural. His stomach tightened. Hunters. He circled the cabin, eyes tracing the snow, and found fresh hoof prints a few miles out, sharp and deliberate. They were closing in. Inside, Gertrudis sat by the fire, her hands clasped, sensing his tension. "What's wrong?" she asked, voice sharp with fear. Tocho stood, wiping his hands on his coat. "They're coming. We need to move." Gertrudis sprang up, her blanket falling to the floor. "Now? They're already here?" Her voice rose, panic flooding her eyes. She paced, clutching her locket. "We can't outrun them." Tocho grabbed her shoulders gently, his steady gaze locking onto hers. "We can. Stay calm." His voice was low, grounding her. She nodded, swallowing hard, though her hands still shook. He moved quickly, stuffing a bag with dried meat, a water flask, and blankets. From the wall, he took his rifle and slid a knife into his belt, each motion precise, practiced. Gertrudis hesitated, voice soft. "Why are you doing this? Risking your life for me?" Tocho paused, his back to her, the question cutting deep. "Because I've lost everything once," he said, voice rough with memory. Turning, he met her gaze, a flicker of pain in his eyes. Gertrudis's chest warmed, a faint spark of trust igniting. They stepped into the night, Tocho leading her down a hidden trail through the dense forest. His hand brushed hers as he guided her, steadying her stumbling steps. Gertrudis's heart stirred, but the distant crack of a twig snapped her back to fear. They moved faster, shadows in the snow, with danger trailing close behind. Tocho guided Gertrudis along a narrow mountain trail, snow crunching under their boots as he moved with steady purpose. He paused to show her how to step lightly, his foot pressing gently into the snow. Like this, no clear tracks. Gertrudis nodded, her legs trembling from exhaustion, but she mimicked his movements, determined to match his pace. Her breath came in short gasps, and his quiet patience steadied her racing heart. They reached a small cave, its entrance hidden by jagged rocks, and Tocho knelt to spark a tiny fire, flames flickering against the stone. Gertrudis sank to the ground, rubbing her hands near the warmth, and words spilled out unbidden. My father believed in justice. He taught me to fight for it. Her voice wavered, thick with grief. Tocho's eyes met hers, his usual reserve softening. I was a scout, he said, voice low, saw my people betrayed, left it all behind. The confession hung heavy, his gaze distant with old pain. Gertrudis's chest tightened, touched by his vulnerability. She wanted to speak, to bridge the gap, but her fingers twisted her locket instead, holding back. The fire's glow lit Tocho's face, and he added a twig, his glance lingering on her. A fragile connection formed, warm and unspoken, but the weight of their escape kept them cautious. Gertrudis shifted closer to the fire, her heart stirring with trust, yet fear of the hunters lingered. Tocho checked the cave's entrance, rifle in hand, ensuring their fleeting safety. Tocho slipped out of the cave at dawn, his boots silent on the snow as he scanned the slopes below. His eyes caught fresh hoofprints snaking through the trees, too close, and a cigarette stub smoldered near a rock. The hunters were hours away, maybe less. His jaw clenched, and he returned to the cave, where Gertrudis crouched by the embers, her face pale. They're near, he said, voice tight. Gertrudis's locket slipped from her fingers, clattering to the stone. They'll catch us. I'm pulling you into this, she choked, eyes wide with panic. Tocho knelt, his hand firm on her arm. I chose this. There's a ravine path to lose them. His calm sliced through her fear. And she nodded, though her hand shook. They smothered the fire, Tocho stuffing their bag with haste. Gertrudis fumbled with her scarf, and as they moved into the dark, the green fabric snagged on a branch, falling unnoticed. Tocho caught her elbow when she tripped on loose stones, his grip steady. Her cheeks flushed, a fleeting warmth cutting through her dread, and she held his hand a moment longer. Stay with me, he whispered, guiding her toward a steep ravine. The wind howled, masking their steps, but Gertrudis's pulse pounded with every rustle in the trees. Tocho's eyes flicked back, rifle ready, his body tense. The scarf lay behind, a silent beacon for the hunters, and the distance between escape and capture shrank with each hurried step. Tocho led Gertrudis through a narrow ravine, the wind biting at their faces as rocks loomed on either side. Her boots slipped on icy stones, and she lurched forward, a scream catching in her throat as the drop below yawned. Tocho's arm shot out, yanking her back, his strength anchoring her. Careful, he muttered, his breath visible in the cold. He pulled a rope from his bag, tying it around her waist with quick, sure knots, his fingers brushing her coat. Gertrudis's heart raced, not just from the near fall, but from his quiet care. Thank you, she whispered, meeting his eyes. He nodded, tying the other end to himself. A distant clatter of hooves echoed, and Tocho's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. The hunters were closing in. We take the high path. It's riskier, but they won't follow, he said, voice low and urgent. Gertrudis swallowed her fear, nodding, her trust in his skill growing. They climbed a steeper trail, Tocho guiding her over slick rocks, his rope steadying her trembling steps. She glanced at him, his focused gaze and taut shoulders a shield against the danger. Her fear ebbed, replaced by a sense of safety in his presence. The hoofbeats faded, but Tocho's pace didn't slow, his hand brushing hers as he helped her over a ledge. Gertrudis's chest warmed, but the sting of cold and the threat behind kept her alert. They pressed on, exhausted but alive, the ravine shadows hiding them for now. Tocho and Gertrudis reached the forest's edge, their breaths heavy as they scanned for a new hiding spot. The trees thinned, offering little cover, but Tocho's eyes searched for safety. A sharp crack split the air, and a bullet grazed Tocho's shoulder, tearing his coat. Gertrudis gasped, spotting Jacob, one of the bounty hunters, holding her green scarf, his rifle aimed. Found you, he growled, firing again. Tocho shoved Gertrudis behind a boulder, his hand firm on her arm as bullets chipped the stone. Her heart pounded, legs trembling as she crouched low. "Run!" Tocho hissed, pulling her into the dense forest. They sprinted, branches snapping against their faces as Jacob's shouts rallied the hunters. Tocho ducked behind a massive rock, yanking Gertrudis down beside him. The crunch of boots and rustle of leaves grew louder, the hunters scouring the trees. Gertrudis shook, her voice a whisper. "They'll kill us." Tocho's hand found hers, his grip tight. "I won't let them touch you," he said, his voice fierce but steady. She clung to his words, her fear easing under his resolve. The hunters' voices neared, and Tocho scanned their bag, realizing it was too heavy. "We ditched the supplies," he said, tossing the pack aside. Gertrudis nodded, her trust in him absolute. They bolted from the rock, weaving through trees, the hunters' shots echoing behind. Gertrudis's legs burned, but Tocho's hand in hers kept her moving, their escape hanging by a thread as pursuit tightened. Tocho led Gertrudis to a shallow river, its icy water swirling over smooth stones, hoping to erase their tracks. He waded in, pulling her along, but his eyes caught movement in the trees. The hunters had split into two groups, their shadows flanking both sides of the riverbank. His heart sank, but he kept moving, urging Gertrudis forward. A gunshot rang out, and Caleb, the second hunter, stood on the bank, his rifle trained on them. The bullet struck Tocho's pack, spilling their remaining food and blankets into the water. Gertrudis screamed, her voice breaking. "We're trapped!" Her eyes darted wildly, panic choking her. Tocho grabbed her arm, pulling her toward a dense thicket, his voice sharp. "Keep moving!" They crashed through underbrush, thorns tearing at their clothes, but Jacob's voice echoed behind, closer now. "Got their trail." Tocho spotted a hollowed tree and shoved Gertrudis inside, squeezing in beside her. Her breath hitched, tears streaming as she clutched his sleeve. "We can't escape," she sobbed. Tocho's jaw clenched, his arm wrapping around her, his voice a low growl. "We're not done." A twig snapped outside, and Jacob's boot stopped inches from the tree. His rifle clicked, and a shot splintered the bark above. Gertrudis bit her lip, stifling a cry, her body shaking against Tocho's. He held her tight, eyes burning with defiance. As Jacob moved on, Tocho whispered, "We'll find another way." Gertrudis nodded, her despair softening under his promise, but the hunter's steps circled back, trapping them in a tightening noose. Tocho crouched beside Gertrudis in the dense forest, his breath steady despite the tightening knot in his chest. Running was no longer enough. The hunters were too close, their traps too tight. He turned to her, eyes resolute. "We face them. It's our only chance." Gertrudis's face paled, her fingers clutching her locket, but she nodded, voice trembling. "The letter from my father. It might convince them." Her trust in the faded paper gave her strength, though fear lingered in her eyes. Tocho led her to a snowy clearing, the open space exposing them but offering a chance to talk. He checked his rifle, its weight a grim reminder of what might come, and stood tall, scanning the tree line. Gertrudis paced, whispering her plea under her breath, practicing words to prove her innocence. She glanced at Tocho, his steady gaze calming her racing heart, a warmth sparking within her fear. "You believe in me, don't you?" she asked softly. He met her eyes, nodding once, and her chest eased. The distant thud of hooves grew louder, and Gertrudis's hand found Tocho's, her fingers cold but firm, drawing courage from his presence. They stood side by side, snow falling around them as shadows emerged from the trees. Tocho's grip tightened on his rifle, his body tense, ready to protect her. Gertrudis squeezed his hand, her voice a whisper. "We can do this." The hunters approached, their rifles gleaming, and the air grew heavy with the weight of the coming confrontation. Jacob and Caleb rode into the clearing, their rifles trained on Gertrudis and Tocho, their faces hard under the dim lantern light. Behind them, Scar lingered, his scarred face unreadable, eyes flicking over the scene. Gertrudis stepped forward, her legs shaking but her voice steady, clutching her father's letter. "I'm Gertrudis Ashcroft, the true heir," she declared, holding the paper aloft, its faded ink a testament to her claim. "Henry, my uncle, framed me to steal my inheritance. He's the liar, not me." Her words rang out, desperate but clear, urging them to choose justice over reward. Jacob snorted, his laugh cold. "Money talks louder than letters, girl." Caleb's rifle stayed steady, his eyes glinting with greed. Scar, silent, leaned closer, studying the letter's seal, his brow furrowing. Gertrudis's heart leapt, sensing his hesitation, and she pressed on. "You're hunting an innocent woman. Help me, and I'll make it right." Tocho stood at her side, his hand near his knife, muscles coiled for a fight. His presence anchored her, his silence a shield. Scar's gaze shifted to Tocho, then back to the letter, his fingers twitching as if weighing a choice. Gertrudis held her breath, hope flickering, but Jacob's sneer and Caleb's steady aim kept her on edge. Tocho's eyes never left the hunters, his body a barrier between them and Gertrudis. The clearing grew still, the tension thick, as Scar's silence stretched, leaving their fate hanging on his next move. Scar's voice broke the silence, low and gravelly. "Your father, he helped me once, years back." Gertrudis's eyes widened, hope surging as she leaned forward. "Then you know he was honest. I'm his daughter, and I'm telling the truth. Help us, please." Her voice trembled, pleading, as she held out the letter, her hands shaking. Scar's gaze lingered on the paper, his scarred cheek twitching, but he said nothing. Jacob shifted, impatient. "We're wasting time. I'll hear her out, but it better be worth it." Caleb scoffed, his rifle swinging toward Gertrudis. "No deal. She's worth $5,000 dead." Tocho moved instantly, shoving Gertrudis behind him, his knife glinting as he faced Caleb. "Try it," he growled, his voice a low threat. Caleb's finger twitched on the trigger, but Scar raised a hand, his voice sharp. "Enough. Give me a day to think." Caleb spat, lowering his gun but glaring. Gertrudis's heart pounded, relief mixing with dread. She glanced at Tocho, his protective stance easing her fear, and mouthed a silent thank you. His eyes softened for a moment, returning her gratitude with a nod. The hunters stepped back, but the air remained heavy, their rifles still close. Gertrudis clung to the faint hope in Scar's hesitation, her hand rushing Tocho's arm, drawing strength from him. They stood frozen, watching the hunters retreat to their horses, but the uneasy truce felt like a ticking clock, each second tightening the knot of tension around them. Night cloaked the clearing as Tocho crouched by Gertrudis, his eyes scanning the shadows. A rustle in the trees caught his ear, and he crept forward, spotting Caleb's horse missing from the hunter's camp. His gut twisted. Betrayal. He returned to Gertrudis, who sat clutching her locket, her face pale. "Caleb's gone. He's sold us out," Tocho whispered, voice urgent. Gertrudis's eyes widened, her breath catching. "Number. We were so close." Her voice broke, despair creeping in as she imagined Henry's men closing in. Tocho grabbed her arm, pulling her to her feet. "We leave now." She shook her head, tears welling. Scar was listening. "We almost had him." Before Tocho could argue, Scar emerged from the dark, his voice low. "I'm with you, but Jacob needs time." Tocho's hand tightened on his knife, distrust flaring. "We don't have time." Gertrudis hesitated, wanting to believe Scar, but Tocho's sharp glance urged her to move. She nodded, grabbing their bag. her heart heavy with the plan's collapse. As they slipped into the forest, the distant thunder of hooves echoed, Henry's mercenaries approaching. Tocho pulled Gertrudis behind a tree, his hand firm on her shoulder. "Stay low," he hissed, rifle ready. Gertrudis's fingers dug into his arm, her hope crumbling as the sound of pursuit grew louder. Scar's offer felt like a trap now, and Caleb's betrayal stung deep. Tocho's steady presence was her only anchor, but the oncoming hooves promised a fight they might not survive. Gunfire erupted as Henry's mercenaries stormed the forest, bullets splintering trees around Tocho and Gertrudis. Tocho grabbed her wrist, yanking her into the underbrush, his body shielding hers as shots whizzed past. "Run!" he shouted, pulling her through tangled branches, their boots slipping in the snow. Gertrudis's heart raced, her lungs burning, but she matched his pace, driven by fear. Behind, Scar and Jacob exchanged fire with the mercenaries, their shouts fading as Tocho led her deeper into the woods. A mercenary burst through the trees, his rifle aimed, and Gertrudis tripped, crashing to the ground. The man lunged, but Tocho tackled him, slamming his fist into the mercenary's jaw, dropping him cold. "Get up!" Tocho urged, hauling Gertrudis to her feet. They sprinted toward a river, its icy waters glinting under moonlight. Without hesitation, Tocho plunged in, pulling her with him, the cold biting their skin. The water erased their tracks, and they emerged shivering on the far bank, collapsing behind a boulder. Gertrudis sobbed, her body trembling. "Scar betrayed us. I trusted him." Tocho's hand cupped her face, his voice soft but firm. "We're alive. We'll find another way." His words steadied her, and she leaned into his touch, her fear easing despite the cold. The gunfire grew distant, the mercenaries thrown off their trail. Gertrudis's tears mixed with river water, her trust in Scar shattered, but Tocho's warmth reignited her resolve. They huddled together, soaked and hunted, their survival hanging by a thread. Gertrudis shivered in a cramped cave, her wet clothes clinging to her skin as she curled against the cold stone, exhaustion weighing her down. Water dripped from her hair, and her teeth chattered as she hugged her knees, eyes red from tears. "I trusted Scar," she whispered, voice breaking. "I thought he'd help, and now we're trapped." Her fingers dug into her locket, guilt choking her. Tocho sat close, his soaked coat steaming faintly by the small fire he'd built. His face was drawn, but his voice was steady. "I was a scout once, got ambushed, thought I'd die, but I kept going." He met her gaze, his eyes warm with quiet strength. "You're stronger than you know." Gertrudis's tears slowed, his words a lifeline pulling her from despair. She looked at him, his face softened by the firelight, and her heart stirred, a fragile warmth blooming. Tocho tore a piece of dried meat in half, handing her a share, his fingers brushing hers. They chewed in silence, the act grounding her, and she nodded, resolve flickering. "What now?" she asked, voice hoarse. Tocho stood, checking the cave's entrance, his rifle in hand. "We find another way." His scan of the shadows caught faint movement, mercenaries lurking nearby. Gertrudis's hand found his, her grip tight. "I only have you now," she said, her voice raw. Tocho's cheeks flushed, but he squeezed her hand, a silent vow. The fire dimmed, and though despair lingered, their shared warmth fueled a spark of hope, pushing them to fight on. Tocho knelt by the cave's entrance, his breath steady as he peered into the dark, the distant bark of dogs sending a chill down his spine. "We can't stay," he said, turning to Gertrudis, who sat huddled, her face pale but resolute. "There's a town nearby. We'll find help." Gertrudis nodded, though her eyes flickered with fear. "What if they spot us?" Her voice trembled, but she stood, brushing dirt from her coat. Tocho pulled a Navajo cloak from his bag, draping it over her shoulders. "Wear this. Keep your face hidden." He adjusted the hood, his fingers gentle, showing her how to blend into the shadows. Her heart quickened at his care, a clear affection stirring beneath her fear. As they prepared to leave, a sharp howl cut through the night, dogs closing in. Tocho grabbed her hand, leading her out and onto a winding path, avoiding the main trails. Gertrudis stumbled over roots, but Tocho steadied her, his grip firm. "Stay close," he whispered, his voice a quiet anchor. She clung to his hand, her fear easing under his protection, a warmth growing in her chest. They moved through dense trees, Tocho's eyes scanning for danger, his rifle ready. Gertrudis adjusted the cloak, mimicking his cautious steps, her trust in him deepening. The dog's barks faded, but the threat remained, a shadow over their fragile hope. They pressed on, driven by Tocho's plan and the budding connection between them, a faint light in their perilous journey. Gertrudis and Tocho crept toward the town's edge, the glow of lanterns flickering through the trees, but the sight of mercenaries patrolling the streets stopped them cold. Tocho signaled for silence, pulling her into a narrow alley, their cloaks blending with the shadows. Gertrudis's heart pounded as they edged along the wall, her breath shallow. "We can slip through," Tocho whispered, pointing to a gap between buildings. They moved swiftly, but a shout shattered the quiet. Caleb, rifle raised, stood at the alley's end, his eyes locking onto them. "Got you," he yelled, firing a shot that splintered the wall above Gertrudis's head. Tocho yanked her back, sprinting toward an open field, bullets kicking up dirt around them. Gertrudis's foot caught on a root, and she fell, her coin purse tumbling into the grass, a gleaming clue for their pursuers. Tocho hauled her up, his grip fierce. "Keep running!" They dove into an abandoned stable, collapsing behind a stack of hay as mercenaries' boots thundered closer. Gertrudis's sobs broke free, her hands shaking. "It's all for nothing," she gasped, tears streaming. Tocho pulled her close, his arms steady around her. "We're not done," he said, voice low and fierce. "I'll find us a way." His warmth seeped into her, igniting a spark of love amidst her despair. The mercenaries' shouts grew louder, their lanterns casting shadows through the stable's cracks. Gertrudis clung to Tocho, her fear tempered by his promise. But the hunter's net tightened, their escape now a desperate gamble. Tocho guided Gertrudis through the shadows toward a small town, their cloaks pulled tight against the biting wind, hoping to find Sheriff Emmett. He handed her a scarf to cover her face, mimicking the locals' attire, his fingers brushing hers as he adjusted it. Gertrudis's stomach churned with worry, but Tocho's calm nod steadied her, his plan her only anchor. They slipped through quiet streets, avoiding lantern-lit corners, and reached a modest house where Mary, an old friend of Gertrudis's father, answered the door. Her eyes widened at Gertrudis's face, but she ushered them inside without a word, leading them to a damp basement. Mary set out bread and cheese, her hands trembling as Gertrudis whispered about Henry's betrayal, her voice thick with desperation. "He framed me, Mary. Emmett can help. Please get word to him." Mary nodded, promising to send a message, and retreated upstairs. Tocho stood by the basement door, rifle in hand, his sharp gaze scanning the darkness outside. Gertrudis watched him, his steady presence easing her fear, a quiet warmth blooming in her chest. "You trust her?" she asked softly. Tocho glanced back, his eyes softening. "She knew your father." "That's enough." Gertrudis clutched her locket, hope flickering as she nibbled the bread, her trust in Tocho deepening. Mary returned, confirming the message was sent, and Gertrudis exhaled, leaning closer to Tocho. The basement felt like a fragile sanctuary, but the threat of Henry's men loomed, their safety hanging on Mary's word and Emmett's response. Mary slipped a folded note to Gertrudis, her whisper urgent. "Emmett will meet you at the old warehouse, midnight." Gertrudis's heart leapt, clutching the note as hope surged, but her fingers trembled at the risk. She sat on the basement floor, rehearsing her plea, her voice low as she practiced explaining Henry's lies. "Emmett knew my father. He'll believe me," she murmured, more to herself than Tocho. He nodded, stepping outside to scout the area, his boots silent on the snow. Returning, he crouched beside her, rifle across his knees. "No mercenaries yet. We move soon." His calm steadied her, and she met his gaze, gratitude welling up. They waited until the town grew still, then slipped out, Tocho leading her through darkened alleys to the warehouse. Gertrudis's hand found his, her grip tight as they moved, the warmth of his fingers grounding her fear. Her heart fluttered, their closeness sharpening her resolve. At the warehouse, its broken windows gaping like eyes, they slipped inside, crouching behind crates. The air was thick with dust, and Gertrudis's pulse raced as they waited, her eyes darting to the door. Tocho's hand rested on her shoulder, a silent reassurance, his rifle ready. "He'll come," he whispered, and she nodded, clinging to his certainty. Footsteps echoed outside, and Gertrudis held her breath, hope and dread twisting together. The door creaked, and a shadow appeared, but the silence felt heavy, danger lurking in the night's quiet. Emmett stepped into the warehouse, his sheriff's badge glinting faintly as he held up a lantern, revealing a yellowed copy of Gertrudis's father's letter. Gertrudis stood, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Henry framed me. Emmett. He wants my inheritance. This letter proves I'm the heir." She poured out the story, her words urgent, begging him to help her reach a court. Emmett's brow furrowed, but he nodded, tucking the letter into his coat. "I believe you, girl. Henry's got half the town in his pocket, though." His warning sent a chill through her, but his agreement sparked hope. Tocho leaned forward, voice low. "Take us to Silvervale. There's a fair judge there." Emmett hesitated, then agreed, his eyes sharp. "Meet me at dawn. I'll get horses and guns." Gertrudis's chest swelled, and she turned to Tocho, her eyes shining with gratitude. His brief smile warmed her, a silent promise of support. They planned to slip out before sunrise, Emmett sketching a route on the dirt floor. As he left, promising to prepare, Gertrudis grabbed Tocho's hand, her voice soft. "We're closer now." He squeezed her fingers, his gaze steady, and her heart fluttered, hope blooming. The warehouse grew quiet, and they settled behind the crates, Gertrudis leaning against Tocho, his presence a shield. The letter's weight felt lighter, their plan solidifying, but the town's stillness hid threats, and Gertrudis's hope mingled with unease as they waited for dawn. Dawn broke, and Mary's urgent knock jolted Gertrudis awake in the basement, her face pale. "Cops are searching the town. They're on to you." Gertrudis's heart sank, panic flaring as she scrambled to her feet. Tocho's eyes narrowed, peering through a crack in the door, spotting a man in a dark coat watching the street. Henry's spy. "They've tracked Emmett," he muttered, grabbing their bag. Gertrudis's hands shook, her voice breaking. "Our plan's ruined." Tocho gripped her arm, his voice firm. "We get to him. Move." They slipped out the back door, Tocho leading her through a maze of alleys, his hand steadying her as they dodged patrolling shadows. A shout rang out, and a deputy's lantern swung toward them, his pistol firing a warning shot. Gertrudis gasped, the letter slipping from her pocket, fluttering to the ground. "No!" she cried, lunging for it. But Tocho yanked her into a side alley, bullets grazing the wall. The bark of dogs echoed, their snarls closing in. Gertrudis's chest heaved, tears stinging her eyes as she ran. The loss of the letter a crushing blow. Tocho's grip never faltered, his voice sharp. "Keep going!" They ducked behind a barrel, the dogs' howls growing louder, their breath visible in the cold. Gertrudis clutched Tocho's sleeve, her fear spiking. but his steady gaze held her. The deputy's boots pounded closer, and Tocho pulled her deeper into the shadows, their escape teetering on the edge as the town turned against them. Tocho weaved Gertrudis through tight alleys, the clamor of boots and barking dogs hot on their heels. He dodged a lantern's glow, pulling her behind a stack of crates, his hand muffling her ragged breaths. The police battered a nearby door, their shouts piercing the dawn, and Gertrudis's eyes brimmed with tears, her voice a broken whisper. "The letter's gone. It's over." Tocho's jaw tightened, his hand cupping her face. "You're the truth, not the paper. We're not done." His words steadied her, a lifeline in her grief, and she nodded, wiping her eyes. They crept toward an open field, aiming for Emmett's meeting point, but a deputy's shot rang out, splintering a fence. Tocho pushed Gertrudis down, covering her as bullets flew. Through the chaos, Emmett staggered into view, clutching his leg, blood seeping through his trousers from a deputy's bullet. "Go!" he gasped, waving them off before collapsing. Gertrudis choked back a sob, guilt crashing over her, but Tocho hauled her up, his voice urgent. "He gave us a chance. Take it." They sprinted across the field, dogs snapping at their heels, and dove into a ditch, mud soaking their clothes. The pursuers' lanterns faded, their shouts growing distant. Gertrudis clung to Tocho, her heart aching for Emmett, her hope shattered. His arm wrapped around her, his warmth a faint spark in the cold. They crawled through the ditch, hunted and alone, their plan in ruins, but their will unbroken. Gertrudis huddled in a forest hollow, her soaked clothes clinging to her shivering frame as hunger gnawed at her stomach. Mud streaked her face, and she clutched her knees, tears falling freely. "I lost the letter," she choked, voice raw. "It was all we had, and I ruined it." Her hands shook, guilt crushing her. Tocho sat beside her, his own clothes damp, and built a small fire, its faint warmth battling the cold. "I was a scout," he said, voice steady but heavy. "Lost my team in an ambush. Thought it was over, but I kept going." His eyes met hers, warm with resolve, pulling her from despair. Gertrudis's breath hitched, his strength stirring something deep within her. She reached for his hand, gripping it tightly, her fingers cold against his warmth. "You're why I'm still here," she whispered, voice trembling with emotion. Tocho's cheeks flushed, his gaze dropping briefly. He tore a strip of dried meat, handing her half, their fingers brushing. They ate in silence, the shared act grounding her. Tocho stepped outside, rifle in hand, and scanned the trees, spotting distant shadows of mercenaries. Gertrudis's heart raced, but she held his hand tighter, her voice soft. "What now?" He squeezed her fingers, resolute. "We fight another way." The fire flickered, casting shadows on the hollow's walls, and though despair lingered, their growing bond fueled a fragile hope. Gertrudis leaned closer, Tocho's presence her anchor, as the threat outside loomed ever closer. Tocho crouched by Gertrudis in the hollow, his eyes fixed on the darkening forest. "We go to Silvervale," he said, voice low. "Henry's mansion has papers, proof of his lies." Gertrudis's stomach twisted, fear flashing in her eyes. "His stronghold will be caught." Her voice wavered, but she nodded, trusting his lead. Tocho knelt, showing her how to move silently, his hand guiding hers to mimic his soft steps. "Stay low, follow my shadow," he instructed, his tone calm but firm. Gertrudis practiced, her movements clumsy but determined, his patience easing her nerves. As they packed, the distant clop of hooves echoed, mercenaries patrolling nearby. Tocho grabbed her arm, leading her out through a winding trail, avoiding open paths. Gertrudis's heart pounded, but his steady grip grounded her, a warmth spreading through her fear. "You're keeping me safe," she whispered, her voice soft with awe. Tocho's eyes met hers, a flicker of emotion breaking his reserve. "Always," he said, voice quiet. They moved through dense trees, Tocho's rifle ready, his steps silent. Gertrudis clung to his cloak, her fear tempered by the love growing clearer in her heart. The hooves faded, but the risk remained, their plan a gamble against Henry's power. Tocho paused, checking their path, and Gertrudis touched his hand, her resolve strengthening. They pressed on, shadows in the night, carrying a faint hope that the mansion held the key to their fight. Gertrudis and Tocho reached Silvervale's edge, crouching behind a fence as lanterns glowed along the town's barricaded streets, mercenaries patrolling in pairs. Gertrudis's pulse raced, her fingers tightening on Tocho's arm. "It's a trap," she whispered, voice trembling. Tocho's jaw clenched, but he pointed to a dark alley. "We slip through." They darted forward, cloaks blending with the shadows, but a shout pierced the quiet. Jacob, rifle raised, stood at the alley's end, his eyes glinting. "Got them!" he yelled, firing a shot that grazed the wall. Tocho yanked Gertrudis into a field, bullets kicking up dirt as they ran. Gertrudis's foot caught on a root, and she fell, her locket tumbling into the grass, its silver gleaming in the moonlight. "No," she gasped, reaching for it, but Tocho hauled her up, his grip fierce. "We can't stop!" They sprinted toward an abandoned shed, diving inside as mercenaries' boots thundered closer. Gertrudis' sobs broke free, her hands shaking. "My father's locket. It's all I had left." Her voice cracked, despair swallowing her. Tocho pulled her close, his arms steady. "You're enough. We'll find another way." His voice was fierce, his warmth piercing her grief. She buried her face in his chest, love anchoring her amidst the loss. The mercenaries' shouts grew louder, their lanterns casting shadows through the shed's cracks. Tocho held her tighter, rifle ready, his promise a lifeline. Gertrudis wiped her tears, nodding, as the hunters closed in, their escape now a desperate race. Tocho led Gertrudis along a hidden trail into Silvervale, their worker disguises loose and dusty, blending with the midnight shadows. They slipped through the town's quiet edges, reaching Henry's mansion, its dark windows looming like eyes. Tocho pressed a finger to his lips, guiding her over a low wall to a side door. Inside, the air was heavy with polish and power. Gertrudis's heart pounded as they crept up a creaking staircase to Henry's office, her hands trembling but steady. She rifled through drawers, papers scattering, until her fingers closed on a leather-bound notebook, its pages listing the Railroad Association's shady deals. Her breath caught, hope surging. "This is it," she whispered, tucking it inside her coat. Tocho stood by the door, rifle ready, his eyes scanning the hall. A faint creak of boots echoed below, and he hissed, "Someone's coming." Gertrudis froze, her pulse racing, but she nodded, shoving the last papers back. Tocho grabbed her hand, his touch a silent vow, and they moved toward the stairs. Gertrudis's eyes met his, gratitude and affection swelling in her chest, her heart fluttering at his unwavering presence. "We're doing this together," she murmured. Tocho's gaze softened, a brief smile breaking his focus. The creak grew louder, a mercenary's shadow flickering on the wall. Tocho tightened his grip, leading her to a side passage, their steps silent. The notebook's weight felt like a lifeline, but the mansion's walls closed in, danger lurking in every shadow as they prepared to slip away. A mercenary's shout shattered the silence, his lantern catching Gertrudis's shadow in the mansion's hall. "Intruders!" a gunshot echoed, the bullet splintering the doorframe. Tocho lunged, slamming his shoulder into the man, sending him sprawling, and grabbed Gertrudis's wrist. "Run!" They sprinted down the corridor, boots pounding on polished wood as alarms rang through the mansion. 2 more mercenaries blocked the stairs, rifles raised, and Tocho shoved Gertrudis behind him, swinging his knife to parry a bayonet. He kicked one man's knee, dropping him, and punched the other, clearing a path. Gertrudis stumbled, her foot catching on a rug, and a loose page from the notebook fluttered to the floor. "No," she gasped, reaching for it. But Tocho yanked her forward, his voice urgent. "We can't stop!" They dove into a side room, Tocho barricading the door with a heavy bookshelf. Footsteps thundered outside, mercenaries shouting as they searched. Gertrudis's hands shook, clutching the notebook, her body pressed against Tocho's. "They'll find us," she whispered, fear choking her. Tocho's hand found hers, his voice steady. "We'll get out. Trust me." His calm bolstered her, and she nodded, gripping his hand tightly, her heart racing but resolute. The bookshelf rattled under a mercenary's shove, and Tocho scanned the room, spotting a window. He pried it open, helping Gertrudis climb out, their escape teetering on the edge as the door splintered behind them. The notebook, their only hope, now hunted as fiercely as they were. Gertrudis clutched the notebook tightly as she and Tocho slipped into Silvervale's crowded square, where townsfolk gathered under flickering lanterns to hear Henry's speech. Her heart pounded, but she nodded to Tocho, who had contacted Mary to rally supportive locals. Mary's sharp nod from the crowd gave Gertrudis courage, and she pushed through the throng, Tocho at her side, his rifle hidden beneath his cloak. Henry stood on a platform, his voice booming about prosperity, but Gertrudis climbed up, interrupting him. "Henry Ashcroft is a liar!" she shouted, holding the notebook aloft. "This proves he and the Railroad Association stole your land." Her voice shook but carried, and murmurs rippled through the crowd, some nodding, others frowning. She read a passage, detailing illegal deals, her words sharp, accusing Henry of betrayal. Tocho stood close, his eyes scanning for threats, his presence a steady anchor. Gertrudis's chest swelled as a few townsfolk cheered, hope flaring, but Henry's cold smile chilled her. "She's a fraud," he countered, his voice smooth, sowing doubt. Gertrudis's grip tightened on the notebook, her love for Tocho fueling her defiance. "Look at the proof," she urged, but the crowd wavered, suspicion growing. Tocho's hand brushed hers, a silent vow to protect her, and she stood taller, voice unwavering. The square buzzed with tension, some locals stepping closer, drawn to her truth, but Henry's mercenaries edged forward, hands on guns, and Gertrudis's hope teetered, the crowd's loyalty hanging in the balance. Henry's laugh cut through the square, sharp and mocking, as he pointed at Gertrudis. "This girl's a thief, forging lies to cheat you." His words swayed the crowd, their murmurs turning hostile, and Gertrudis's heart sank, her hands trembling around the notebook. She stepped forward, voice desperate. "It's the truth. He's stealing from us all." But Henry snapped his fingers, and a mercenary lunged, snatching the notebook from her grasp. Before she could react, he tossed it into a nearby fire, flames devouring the pages. Gertrudis screamed, diving toward the blaze, but another mercenary blocked her, shoving her back. "No!" she cried, tears streaming as the evidence burned. The crowd jeered, Henry's lies taking root, and Gertrudis's hope crumbled. Tocho leaped forward, tackling a mercenary who swung at her, his fists swift as he cleared a path. "We're leaving!" he shouted, grabbing her arm. Bullets cracked through the air, mercenaries firing as Tocho pulled Gertrudis through the chaos, her sobs choking her. They ducked behind a wagon, the crowd's shouts and gunfire deafening. Gertrudis clutched Tocho's sleeve, her voice broken. "It's gone. We've lost." His eyes burned with defiance, his hand cupping her face. "Not while we're alive." His strength steadied her, love piercing her despair, but the mercenaries closed in, their boots pounding the dirt. Tocho dragged her toward an alley, bullets grazing the wagon, Their escape a frantic race as the crowd turned against them, Henry's victory sealing their defeat. Tocho stumbled into an alley, blood seeping from a mercenary's knife wound in his shoulder, his face pale but set. Gertrudis's heart stopped, and she pulled him into an abandoned shed, her hands shaking as she tore her sleeve to bandage him. "You're hurt," she gasped, tears falling as she pressed the cloth to his wound, the blood staining her fingers. Tocho winced but gripped her hand, his voice steady despite the pain. "I'm fine. For you." His words hit her like a wave, love and fear crashing together. She tied the bandage tightly, her sobs quieting as she worked, guilt clawing at her. "This is my fault. I dragged you into this," she whispered, her voice raw. Tocho shook his head, his eyes fierce. "I chose to stay." His hand squeezed hers, a vow that anchored her. The distant shouts of mercenaries grew louder, their lanterns flickering through the shed's cracks. Gertrudis froze, her pulse racing, but Tocho's calm kept her grounded. "We need to move deeper," he said, pulling her toward a pile of crates in the shed's corner. They crouched, the mercenaries' boots scraping outside, searching. Gertrudis's hand stayed in Tocho's, her fear tempered by his presence. She leaned against him, her voice barely audible. "I can't lose you." Tocho's jaw tightened, his arm wrapping around her, shielding her from the threat. The shed creaked under the mercenaries' prodding, and Gertrudis held her breath, their survival hinging on silence as danger pressed closer. Tocho, weakened by his wound, led Gertrudis through a dark alley, his steps faltering but determined, the pain etched in his clenched jaw. They ducked into a deserted stable, the smell of old hay thick as mercenaries' footsteps echoed nearby. Gertrudis knelt beside him, retying his bandage, her fingers gentle but trembling. Blood seeped through the cloth, and her heart ached. "You're hurt because of me," she whispered, tears welling. Tocho's hand caught hers, his touch warm despite his pallor. "I'd do it again," he said, his voice soft but firm, a smile breaking through his pain. Gertrudis's breath hitched, love flooding her as she leaned closer, her forehead brushing his. "I don't want to lose you," she said, her voice raw, admitting her heart. Tocho's eyes softened, his hand tightening. "You won't." The mercenaries' shouts grew fainter, their search moving past, and Gertrudis's shoulders eased. They needed to leave Silvervale to find a new way to fight. "We'll regroup," Tocho said, forcing himself to stand, leaning on her for support. Gertrudis nodded, wiping her tears, her resolve reigniting. She helped him to the stable's back door, her arm around his waist, their closeness, a quiet strength. The night was still, but danger lingered, and Gertrudis's love for Tocho fueled her determination. They slipped out, moving toward the town's edge, their steps slow but steady, carrying a fragile hope that they could still challenge Henry's power. Gertrudis and Tocho crouched in a forest clearing, their clothes tattered and stomachs empty, the cold biting through their thin cloaks. Gertrudis's tears fell silently, her hands twisting together. "The notebook's gone. We have nothing left," she whispered, voice cracking as despair gripped her. Tocho sat close, his shoulder still seeping blood, but his eyes held steady. "I lost faith once," he said, voice low. "My team died in a trap. I thought I'd never fight again, but I did." His words carried a quiet fire, pulling her gaze to him. Gertrudis's chest tightened, his strength stirring her heart, and she reached for his hand, her fingers lacing with his. "You're all I have," she said, her voice raw, love shining through her pain. Tocho's cheeks flushed, his grip tightening. He tore a crust of bread from their meager supply, splitting it with her, their shared hunger binding them. The fire they'd risked flickered weakly, and Tocho stood, wincing, to check the surrounding trees. His sharp eyes caught mercenary shadows in the distance, their lanterns glinting. Gertrudis's pulse quickened, but she held his hand tighter, resolve hardening. "We go to Denver," Tocho said, voice firm. "We face the railroad board." Gertrudis nodded, wiping her eyes, his courage fueling hers. "As long as you're with me," she whispered, her love a beacon in the dark. They packed their scraps, Tocho's arm around her, and moved deeper into the forest, hunted but unbroken, their bond a spark against the crushing weight of defeat. Gertrudis clutched the notebook tightly as she and Tocho slipped into Silvervale's crowded square, where townsfolk gathered under flickering lanterns to hear Henry's speech. Her heart pounded, but she nodded to Tocho, who had contacted Mary to rally supportive locals. Mary's sharp nod from the crowd gave Gertrudis courage, and she pushed through the throng, Tocho at her side, his rifle hidden beneath his cloak. Henry stood on a platform, his voice booming about prosperity, but Gertrudis climbed up, interrupting him. "Henry Ashcroft is a liar," she shouted, holding the notebook aloft. "This proves he and the Railroad Association stole your land." Her voice shook but carried, and murmurs rippled through the crowd, some nodding, others frowning. She read a passage detailing illegal deals, her words sharp, accusing Henry of betrayal. Tocho stood close, his eyes scanning for threats, his presence a steady anchor. Gertrudis's chest swelled as a few townsfolk cheered, hope flaring, but Henry's cold smile chilled her. "She's a fraud," he countered, his voice smooth, sowing doubt. Gertrudis's grip tightened on the notebook, her love for Tocho fueling her defiance. "Look at the proof," she urged, but the crowd wavered, suspicion growing. Tocho's hand brushed hers, a silent vow to protect her, and she stood taller, voice unwavering. The square buzzed with tension, some locals stepping closer, drawn to her truth, but Henry's mercenaries edged forward, hands on guns, and Gertrudis's hope teetered, the crowd's loyalty hanging in the balance. Henry's laugh cut through the square, sharp and mocking, as he pointed at Gertrudis. "This girl's a thief, forging lies to cheat you." His words swayed the crowd, their murmurs turning hostile, and Gertrudis's heart sank, her hands trembling around the notebook. She stepped forward, voice desperate. "It's the truth. He's stealing from us all." But Henry snapped his fingers, and a mercenary lunged, snatching the notebook from her grasp. Before she could react, he tossed it into a nearby fire, flames devouring the pages. Gertrudis screamed, diving toward the blaze, but another mercenary blocked her, shoving her back. "No!" she cried, tears streaming as the evidence burned. The crowd jeered, Henry's lies taking root, and Gertrudis's hope crumbled. Tocho leaped forward, tackling a mercenary who swung at her, his fists swift as he cleared a path. "We're leaving!" he shouted, grabbing her arm. Bullets cracked through the air, mercenaries firing as Tocho pulled Gertrudis through the chaos, her sobs choking her. They ducked behind a wagon, the crowd's shouts and gunfire deafening. Gertrudis clutched Tocho's sleeve, her voice broken. "It's gone. We've lost." His eyes burned with defiance, his hand cupping her face. "Not while we're alive." His strength steadied her, love piercing her despair, but the mercenaries closed in, their boots pounding the dirt. Tocho dragged her toward an alley, bullets grazing the wagon, their escape a frantic race as the crowd turned against them, Henry's victory sealing their defeat. Tocho stumbled into an alley, blood seeping from a mercenary's knife wound in his shoulder, his face pale but set. Gertrudis's heart stopped, and she pulled him into an abandoned shed, her hands shaking as she tore her sleeve to bandage him. "You're hurt," she gasped, tears falling as she pressed the cloth to his wound, the blood staining her fingers. Tocho winced, but gripped her hand, his voice steady despite the pain. "I'm fine. For you." His words hit her like a wave, love and fear crashing together. She tied the bandage tightly, her sobs quieting as she worked, guilt clawing at her. "This is my fault. I dragged you into this," she whispered, her voice raw. Tocho shook his head, his eyes fierce. "I chose to stay." His hand squeezed hers, a vow that anchored her. The distant shouts of mercenaries grew louder, their lanterns flickering through the shed's cracks. Gertrudis froze, her pulse racing, but Tocho's calm kept her grounded. "We need to move deeper," he said, pulling her toward a pile of crates in the shed's corner. They crouched, the mercenaries' boots scraping outside, searching. Gertrudis's hand stayed in Tocho's, her fear tempered by his presence. She leaned against him, her voice barely audible. "I can't lose you." Tocho's jaw tightened, his arm wrapping around her, shielding her from the threat. The shed creaked under the mercenaries' prodding, and Gertrudis held her breath, their survival hinging on silence as danger pressed closer. Tocho, weakened by his wound, led Gertrudis through a dark alley, his steps faltering but determined, the pain etched in his clenched jaw. They ducked into a deserted stable, the smell of old hay thick as mercenaries' footsteps echoed nearby. Gertrudis knelt beside him, retying his bandage, her fingers gentle but trembling. Blood seeped through the cloth, and her heart ached. "You're hurt because of me," she whispered, tears welling. Tocho's hand caught hers, his touch warm despite his pallor. "I'd do it again," he said, his voice soft but firm, a smile breaking through his pain. Gertrudis's breath hitched, love flooding her as she leaned closer, her forehead brushing his. "I don't want to lose you," she said, her voice raw, admitting her heart. Tocho's eyes softened, his hand tightening. "You won't." The mercenaries' shouts grew fainter, their search moving past, and Gertrudis's shoulders eased. They needed to leave Silvervale to find a new way to fight. "We'll regroup," Tocho said, forcing himself to stand, leaning on her for support. Gertrudis nodded, wiping her tears, her resolve reigniting. She helped him to the stable's back door, her arm around his waist, their closeness, a quiet strength. The night was still, but danger lingered, and Gertrudis's love for Tocho fueled her determination. They slipped out, moving toward the town's edge, their steps slow but steady, carrying a fragile hope that they could still challenge Henry's power. Gertrudis and Tocho crouched in a forest clearing, their clothes tattered and stomachs empty, the cold biting through their thin cloaks. Gertrudis's tears fell silently, her hands twisting together. "The notebook's gone. We have nothing left," she whispered, voice cracking as despair gripped her. Tocho sat close, his shoulder still seeping blood, but his eyes held steady. "I lost faith once," he said, voice low. "My team died in a trap. I thought I'd never fight again, but I did." His words carried a quiet fire, pulling her gaze to him. Gertrudis's chest tightened, his strength stirring her heart, and she reached for his hand, her fingers lacing with his. "You're all I have," she said, her voice raw, love shining through her pain. Tocho's cheeks flushed, his grip tightening. He tore a crust of bread from their meager supplies, splitting it with her, their shared hunger binding them. The fire they'd risked flickered weakly, and Tocho stood, wincing, to check the surrounding trees. His sharp eyes caught mercenary shadows in the distance, their lanterns glinting. Gertrudis's pulse quickened, but she held his hand tighter, resolve hardening. "We go to Denver," Tocho said, voice firm. "We face the railroad board." Gertrudis nodded, wiping her eyes, his courage fueling hers. "As long as you're with me," she whispered, her love a beacon in the dark. They packed their scraps, Tocho's arm around her, and moved deeper into the forest, hunted but unbroken, their bond a spark against the crushing weight of defeat. Gertrudis stepped into the Denver hearing hall, her boots echoing on the polished floor as she faced the railroad board, their stern faces lit by gas lamps. She clutched her father's letter, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Henry Ashcroft and the Railroad Association stole land and lied to us all, she declared, recounting his fraud with fierce clarity, her words sharp as she held up the letter. Emmett rose, his voice firm, confirming the letter's authenticity and Henry's crimes, his testimony bolstering her claim. A few board members leaned forward, nodding, and Gertrudis's chest swelled with hope, her eyes bright with possibility. Tocho stood behind her, his presence a quiet strength, but his gaze fixed on Charles Grayson, the association's head, whose cold smile sent a chill through her. She pushed on, voice rising, calling for justice for the cheated townsfolk, her courage fueled by Tocho's protective stance. His hand brushed her back, a subtle reassurance, and she stood taller, heart pounding with defiance. The room buzzed, some members scribbling notes, and Gertrudis dared to believe they'd listen. Tocho's eyes never left Grayson, his rifle hidden beneath his cloak, ready for trouble. Gertrudis finished, her voice echoing, and the board murmured, her hope soaring as she glanced at Tocho. His nod, a silent vow. The air grew heavy, Grayson's smile widening, and Gertrudis's heart tightened, sensing a storm brewing despite their strong start. Grayson rose from the board's table, his voice smooth and cutting as he waved a stack of forged papers. "This girl's a liar, abandoning her family's estate," he said, his eyes glinting with malice. "These prove she has no claim." Gertrudis's stomach dropped, her hands trembling as the board members shuffled, their faces hardening with doubt. She stepped forward, voice shaking. "That's not true. Henry forged those." But her words faltered, the missing notebook, a gaping hole in her case. The board's chairman frowned, demanding more evidence, his tone sharp. Gertrudis's throat tightened, panic rising as she clutched the letter, its single page feeling flimsy. Emmett stood, his voice booming. "I saw Ashcroft's schemes myself," but Grayson cut him off, his smile icy. "You'll face federal charges for slander, Sheriff." Emmett's face reddened, but he held his ground, fists clenched. Gertrudis's knees weakened, despair creeping in as the board whispered, their trust slipping. Tocho's hand found hers, his grip firm, his whisper fierce. "We're not done." His voice steadied her, love piercing her fear, and she nodded, forcing herself to stand tall. She met Grayson's gaze, defiance burning despite her crumbling hope. The board adjourned for deliberation, their skeptical glances heavy, and Gertrudis's heart sank, her fingers tightening in Tocho's. The hall emptied, leaving them alone, and she leaned against him, her voice a whisper. "What now?" Tocho's arm wrapped around her, his resolve unshaken, but Grayson's victory loomed, their fight teetering on the edge of collapse. Gertrudis stood frozen outside the hearing hall, her breath catching as a gunshot cracked through the morning air. Emmett staggered on the steps, blood blooming across his chest, a mercenary's pistol smoking in the alley. He collapsed, eyes wide, and Gertrudis screamed, rushing toward him, tears streaming. "Emmett!" Her hands pressed his wound, blood soaking her fingers, but his breath rattled, fading. The mercenary vanished into the crowd, and Gertrudis sobbed, guilt crashing over her. "I brought you into this," she choked, her voice raw. Tocho grabbed her arm, pulling her back as Grayson's guards appeared, their rifles raised. "We have to go," he shouted, dragging her into a side street, bullets grazing the cobblestones. Gertrudis's legs shook, her sobs choking her, but Tocho's grip kept her moving, his voice urgent. "We'll fight for him." His words pierced her grief, love and resolve intertwining, and she nodded, wiping her tears. They ducked into an alley, the guards' shouts echoing behind. Gertrudis's heart ached, Emmett's sacrifice a searing wound, but Tocho's arm around her was a lifeline. "I can't let his death be for nothing," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. Tocho's eyes burned with determination, his hand squeezing hers. The clatter of boots grew closer, and they sprinted through the maze of alleys, Gertrudis clinging to Tocho's promise. The loss of Emmett crushed her, but their love and his sacrifice fueled her will to keep running, their escape a desperate bid to honor his stand. Tocho led Gertrudis through Denver's twisting alleys, his wounded shoulder aching as he dodged the glow of Grayson's guards' lanterns. Their shouts echoed, boots pounding just streets away, and Gertrudis's breath hitched, her eyes red from tears. They slipped into a derelict warehouse, crouching behind rusted machinery. As the guards' voices grew louder, searching, Gertrudis's hands shook, her voice a broken whisper. Emmett died for nothing. We've lost everything. Her tears fell, despair swallowing her. Tocho pulled her close, his arm steady despite his pain. His fight lives in us, he said, voice fierce. We'll make them pay. His words sparked a flicker of resolve, and she nodded, clinging to his warmth, love anchoring her grief. The guards' lanterns swept the warehouse entrance, and Tocho's eyes darted to a side door, spotting a tethered horse in the shadows beyond. We ride out, he whispered, leading her through the dark, their steps silent. Gertrudis's heart pounded, but she followed, her hand in his, trusting his lead. They untied the horse, Tocho helping her mount before climbing up, wincing as his wound flared. Hold on, he said, spurring the horse into the night. Gertrudis gripped his waist, her voice soft. I only have you now. Tocho's jaw tightened, his nod, a silent vow. The guard shouts faded as they galloped toward Silvervale, their plans shattered but their will unbroken, driven by love and a desperate need to fight on. Gertrudis and Tocho hid in a forest near Silvervale, their clothes torn and faces gaunt from hunger, the cold biting through their thin cloaks. Gertrudis sat against a tree, her knees drawn up, tears streaming as she stared at the ground. Emmett's gone. The letter, the notebook, everything, she whispered, voice cracking, despair choking her. Tocho knelt beside her, his wounded shoulders stiff, but his eyes held a quiet fire. I lost my team once, he said, voice low. Thought I'd never go on, but I did, and you will too. His words cut through her grief, and she looked at him, his face worn but resolute, love swelling in her chest. She reached for his hand, her fingers lacing tightly with his, drawing strength from his warmth. You're why I haven't given up, she said, her voice raw, tears falling. Tocho's cheeks flushed, his grip firm. He broke a crust of bread, their last scrap, and shared it, their silent bond deepening. Tocho stood, rifle in hand, and scanned the trees, spotting mercenary lanterns glinting in the distance. Gertrudis's pulse quickened, but she held his hand tighter, resolve hardening. We try again, Tocho said, voice steady. One last plan. Gertrudis nodded, wiping her tears, her love for him a beacon. As long as you're here, she whispered, her heart steady despite the fear. They packed their meager supplies, Tocho's arm around her, moving deeper into the forest, hunted but defiant, their love a spark against the crushing weight of loss. Gertrudis and Tocho crept through Silvervale's outskirts, their cloaks blending with the dawn shadows as they sought new allies, their breath visible in the cold. Gertrudis's heart pounded, hope flickering after Denver's failure, but a sharp shout shattered the quiet. Jacob, rifle raised, stood on a rooftop, his eyes locking onto them. They're back, he yelled, firing a shot that kicked up dirt. Tocho grabbed Gertrudis's arm, sprinting across a field, bullets whizzing past. Her foot caught on a rock, and she fell, the copy of Emmett's letter slipping from her pocket, fluttering into the grass. No, she cried, reaching for it, but Tocho hauled her up, his voice urgent. We can't stop. They dove into an abandoned barn, collapsing behind hay bales as mercenaries' boots thundered closer. Gertrudis's sobs broke free, her hands shaking. "It's all gone. We've failed," she gasped, tears streaming. Tocho pulled her close, his arms steady despite his own exhaustion. "There's one more way," he said, voice fierce with love. "We fight with the truth." His words pierced her despair, and she nodded, clinging to his warmth, love anchoring her. The mercenaries' lanterns swept the barn's cracks, their shouts growing louder. Tocho gripped his rifle, his eyes scanning for an escape. Gertrudis wiped her tears, her resolve hardening as she leaned into him, their bond a lifeline. The mercenaries circled closer, their pursuit relentless, but Tocho's promise fueled her, their survival now a desperate stand against overwhelming odds. Tocho sat with Gertrudis in the barn, his wounded shoulder throbbing as he met her tear-streaked gaze. "We rally Silvervale's people," he said, voice steady. "Expose Henry publicly." Gertrudis's eyes widened, doubt flickering, but she nodded, gripping her locket. "I remember the notebook's details. I'll rewrite them." Her voice trembled with resolve, and Tocho's nod bolstered her. They sent a coded message to Mary, begging her to gather townsfolk wronged by the Railroad Association. Tocho slipped out, meeting Navajo leaders in a hidden grove, his words earnest as he urged them to join the fight. Gertrudis hunched over a scrap of paper, scribbling the association's deals from memory, her hand shaking but precise. "This is our last chance," she said, looking at Tocho, her heart swelling with trust. He took her hand, his grip firm, his voice soft. "I'm with you." His promise warmed her, love steadying her fear. They worked through the night, Gertrudis's notes piling up, Tocho sharpening his knife, both driven by a shared purpose. Mary's reply came, promising a crowd, and Gertrudis's hopes surged, her fingers tightening in Tocho's. "We can do this," she whispered, her resolve hardening. Tocho checked the barn's perimeter, spotting mercenary shadows in the distance, their threat ever present. Gertrudis stood, her notes clutched tightly, and leaned against Tocho, their bond a quiet strength. The night held danger, but their plan took shape, a fragile hope rising as they prepared to face Silvervale, their love and determination, a beacon against the looming fight. Gertrudis stood in a Silvervale tavern's back room, her hands trembling as she listened to townsfolk, their voices raw with stories of land stolen by the Railroad Association. Old farmers and widows crowded close, their anger fueling her resolve. Mary handed her a stack of faded deeds, proof of the association's theft, her eyes fierce. "Show them," Mary urged, and Gertrudis nodded, her heart pounding with purpose. Tocho returned from meeting Navajo leaders, his voice steady as he confirmed their support. "They'll testify," he said, his hand brushing hers, a quiet reassurance. Gertrudis sat, scribbling their stories into a ledger, her pen scratching late into the night as she prepared to send it to a Washington journalist. "We're doing what's right," she said, gripping Tocho's hand, her voice soft with conviction. He smiled, his eyes warm, and leaned closer. "I love you," he said, voice low, and Gertrudis's cheeks flushed, her heart soaring. "I love you too," she whispered, their bond deepening in the candlelight. They worked tirelessly, Gertrudis's notes growing, Tocho guarding the door, his rifle ready. Mary's allies spread word of a public meeting, and hope swelled, but Tocho's sharp glance caught mercenary shadows outside, tracking their moves. Gertrudis's pulse quickened, but she squeezed Tocho's hand, her love a shield against fear. The tavern's walls closed in, the threat looming. But their gathered evidence and shared resolve lit a fire, their fight now a collective stand, with Silvervale's wronged at their side. Gertrudis and Tocho huddled in a Silvervale attic, their breath visible as Gertrudis sent a packet of testimonies to a Washington journalist through a trusted courier. The journalist's reply came swiftly, promising to publish but demanding more witnesses. Gertrudis's heart raced, and she turned to Mary, her voice urgent. "Will you speak? Your story matters." Mary's jaw tightened, but she nodded, her eyes fierce. Tocho convinced a Navajo elder, his words earnest in a quiet meeting, securing another voice. Gertrudis's hope surged, her fingers trembling as she added their names to the plan. Tocho scouted the streets, returning with a frown. "Henry's men are watching," he said, voice low. Gertrudis's stomach twisted, but she met his gaze, love steadying her. They shifted their meeting with the journalist to a hidden barn, slipping through alleys to avoid detection. "You keep us safe," Gertrudis whispered, her hand in Tocho's, her voice soft with awe. His grip tightened, his eyes warm but alert. "Always," he said, rifle ready. They planned a public meeting in Silvervale Square, Gertrudis memorizing her speech, her resolve sharpened by Tocho's faith. The barn's shadows hid them, but Henry's mercenaries prowled closer, their lanterns glinting. Gertrudis leaned against Tocho, her heart full, love clear in her touch. "We're close," she said, voice steady. Tocho nodded, his arm around her, their bond a quiet strength. The journalist's support and witnesses fueled their hope, but the growing threat of Henry's men cast a shadow, their stand now a race against time. Gertrudis stood in Silvervale Square, her hands steady as she helped Tocho and Mary organize the crowd, townsfolk and Navajo leaders gathering under torchlight. Mary climbed onto a crate, her voice sharp as she recounted the association's theft, her words stirring murmurs of anger. Tocho led Navajo elders to the front, their presence lending weight, their nods bolstering Gertrudis's resolve. She clutched her speech, its pages worn, and rehearsed silently, her heart pounding with determination to expose Henry and the association. A runner whispered to Tocho, his face darkening. "Henry knows. His men are coming." Gertrudis's breath caught, but she nodded, gripping Tocho's hand. "We go now," she said, voice firm. Tocho rallied townsfolk to guard the square, their pitchforks and rifles ready, his commands calm but urgent. Gertrudis met his eyes, her voice soft. "We'll do this together." His hand squeezed hers, love and resolve intertwining, and he smiled, a rare warmth breaking through. "Together," he said, positioning himself beside her, rifle in hand. The crowd grew restless, sensing the coming storm, and Gertrudis stepped onto the platform, her speech ready, her heart full of fire. Tocho stood close, his presence a shield, his eyes scanning for threats. The square buzzed with tension, the townsfolk's hope clashing with the looming danger of Henry's mercenaries. Gertrudis's love for Tocho and their shared fight fueled her, her voice rising as she prepared to speak, their stand a defiant cry against injustice. Gertrudis climbed onto the platform in Silvervale Square, her hands steady despite the torchlit crowd's restless murmurs, her voice rising clear and fierce. "Henry Ashcroft and the Railroad Association betrayed you," she declared, holding up her handwritten notes, reading testimonies of stolen land and broken lives. Her words cut through the night, each story of loss fueling the townsfolk's anger, their shouts of agreement echoing. A Navajo elder stepped forward, his voice deep as he confirmed the association's theft of tribal lands, his words stirring the crowd to a roar. Henry pushed through the throng, his face twisted with rage, and pointed at Gertrudis. "She's a liar, forging tales to ruin me." But the crowd booed, their trust shifting, drowning his lies. Gertrudis stood tall, her heart pounding with triumph, Tocho at her side, his rifle ready, eyes scanning for threats. His presence anchored her, love strengthening her resolve, and she met Henry's glare, voice unwavering. "The truth stands here." The townsfolk surged closer, some shaking fists, their faith in her growing. Tocho's hand brushed hers, a silent vow, and Gertrudis's chest swelled, feeling their shared strength. Mary's sharp cry rallied more supporters, and the square pulsed with defiance, the crowd's unity a wall against Henry's power. Gertrudis's voice rang out, calling for justice, her love for Tocho and the people's trust lifting her. But Henry's mercenaries loomed at the edges, their rifles glinting, threatening to shatter the fragile victory. Chaos erupted as Henry's mercenaries charged the square, their gunfire splitting the air, sending townsfolk scrambling. Tocho leaped forward, tackling a mercenary aiming at Gertrudis, his knife flashing as he disarmed another, blood seeping from his reopened shoulder wound. Gertrudis stood on the platform, heart racing, and faced Henry, her voice booming over the din. "You stole our lives, Henry. Your lies end now." Her words rallied the crowd, who surged forward, brandishing tools and fists, blocking the mercenaries' advance. Henry's face paled, his shouts lost as the townsfolk's roar overwhelmed him. Tocho fought through the fray, his movements fierce, protecting Gertrudis and Mary, who rallied the crowd. A local deputy, pressured by the mob, pushed through, handcuffs glinting, and seized Henry, dragging him back as the crowd cheered. Gertrudis's breath caught, victory dawning, but her eyes searched for Tocho, fear spiking. He staggered back to her, blood staining his coat, but his smile broke through, weary yet warm. "We did it," he said, voice rough. Gertrudis threw her arms around him, tears of relief falling, love flooding her as she held him tight. "You're safe," she whispered, her voice trembling. The mercenaries retreated, the crowd's defiance too strong, and the deputy hauled Henry away. Gertrudis stood with Tocho, their hands clasped, the square alive with triumph, but the cost of their fight weighed heavy, their victory a hard-won step toward justice. Gertrudis stood by Silvervale's river, the stars bright above, her boots firm on the ground. She now led as the Ashcroft estate's rightful heir. She signed deeds returning stolen land to farmers and Navajo families, her hands steady as she handed them out, their grateful nods warming her heart. Tocho worked beside her, his shoulder healed, helping build a school where children's laughter echoed, a symbol of their new community. Their love, forged through loss and struggle, shone in quiet moments, his hand finding hers as they walked the town's revitalized streets, rebuilt with fair wages and shared hope. Silvervale buzzed with life, its people united, no longer cowed by greed. Gertrudis paused by the riverbank, Tocho at her side, and they vowed to shape a future of justice, their voices soft but resolute. "For Emmett," she whispered, her heart aching for his sacrifice, his memory of fire driving her forward. Tocho's arm wrapped around her, his touch a promise, and she leaned into him, love steadying her grief. The townsfolk called her the flame beneath the ice, their respect a tribute to her fight. Gertrudis looked at Tocho, his eyes reflecting the stars, and smiled, her voice tender. "We made it." He nodded, pulling her close, their shared journey a testament to courage. The river flowed, carrying their past, and Silvervale stood reborn, a beacon of unity, their love and Emmett's legacy, a quiet strength that would endure, guiding them through the pain to a hopeful dawn.